In this section, we're going to talk about the facade pattern. We use this pattern to provide a simple interface to a complex system. Here's a real example. Let's imagine we're going to build a mobile app, and as part of this app, we want to send push notifications to our users. So let's add a new package called Facade. And in this package, we're going to add a bunch of classes for connecting to a notification server and sending a message. So at a minimum, we need a class called message. Here we add a private field of type string called content, and then initialize it using a constructor. Beautiful. Now let's add another class called notification server. Let's imagine these are the series of steps that we need to follow to send a notification. First, we have to connect to our server, and let's say this will return a connection object that we'll later use to disconnect from the server. Next, we should authenticate. So here we should provide some kind of application identifier. So this is a string that is unique to each app. We should also provide a key. This is like a password for each application. And let's say this authenticate method is going to return an authentication token object. So we need to pass this token when sending a message. So we need another method here, send, which takes an authentication token along with a message and perhaps a string that specifies the target user or the target device. And finally, when we are done, we have to disconnect. So we call connection.disconnect. Let's imagine this is the basic framework for sending a push notification to a mobile device. So let's go ahead and implement these methods. First, we're going to implement the connect method. So we should create a class called connection. So let's add this class, connection. Our connection class should have a method called disconnect. So public void disconnect. Now, back in the notification server, we add a new method that returns a connection object. And this is the connection class that we defined in the facade package. So we call it connect. And perhaps we should provide the IP address of our notification server. Now here we return a new connection object. Good. So that was for our first step. Next, we need to implement the authenticate method. This method should return an authentication token object. So let's add a new class called auth token. Now, back in the notification server, let's add a new method that returns an authentication token object. We call it authenticate. Here we should pass an application ID and a key. So string app ID and string key. Here we should return a new auth token object. Good. Next, we need to implement the send method. That is pretty straightforward. So public void send, we should pass an authentication token along with a message. And finally, the target device. Perhaps we're going to identify each device using their IP address. But again, let's not worry about these details. So this is where we're going to send a message. Let's print sending a message. Now, let's use these classes in the main method. So we go to our main class. First, we should create a notification server. So server equals new notification server. Next, we should connect to the server. So connection equals server.connect. And here we pass an imaginary IP address. Next, we need to authenticate to tell the server who we are. So we call server.authenticate and pass our app ID and a private key. This will return an authentication token. So we get it. And we're going to use this in the next step for sending a message. So server.send, we pass our authentication token. Here we should pass a message. So let's create a message object, new message. And let's say hello world. We're going to pass that message and the IP of the target device. Finally, we're going to call connection.disconnect. Now, Here's the problem with this implementation. Every time we want to send a push notification to our users, we have to follow all these steps. We have to create a notification server. We have to connect to that server. Then we need to get an authentication token. We have to create a message, send it, and then disconnect. There are so many steps that we have to follow. We use the facade pattern to solve this problem. We'll look at that in the next video.